The man who called down fire from heaven asked God to kill him 48 hours later. You read that right. Elijah, the prophet who stared down 450 priests of Baal and one ran into the wilderness, collapsed under a broom tree, and begged to die. And if you've ever stood in a pulpit on Sunday morning while something inside you was screaming on Saturday night, this story already knows your name. You smile at the door, you shake the hands, you preach the sermon you wrote at 2 a.m. because the words wouldn't come at a reasonable hour. People tell you it was exactly what they needed. You drive home and feel hollow, just static. That static has a biblical address and it sits under a juniper tree in the wilderness south of Beersheba. 1 Kings chapter 19 verses 3 through 5 tells it plainly. Elijah arose and went for his life and came to Beersheba and left his servant there. He went a day's journey into the wilderness, came and sat down under a juniper tree, and requested for himself that he might die. It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. Then he lay down and slept. Look at the sequence. He left his servant. He walked a full day past the last person who knew his name. He chose a tree that offered just enough shade to die in private. This is the geography of ministry burnout, and it has barely changed in 3,000 years. The shepherd who can't be seen needing a shepherd. The pastor who counsels everyone and confesses to no one. The worship leader who carries the room into the presence of God on a Sunday and can't feel God on a Tuesday. You know this map. You've walked it. But here's the part the highlight reel skip. Before God said a single word to Elijah, he let him sleep. An angel touched him and the only message was, eat. He ate, he slept again. The angel came back, eat, because the journey is too great for you. 2 meals, 2 naps, no rebuke, no sermon, no snap out of it. The first thing the holy God did for his burnt-out prophet was feed his body and let him rest. Read that sequence again the next time you skip a meal, because the elders' meeting ran long. Read it when you've answered 17 texts before breakfast and called it serving the flock. The first ministry of God to a collapsing servant was a sandwich and a nap, something to sit with while you're pushing through for the kingdom on 4 hours of sleep and stale coffee. So why was Elijah so destroyed? He just won fire from heaven, rain after 3 years of drought, prophets of Baal defeated in front of the whole nation. By every metric we use to grade ministry, attendance, miracles, cultural impact, he had just preached the sermon of the century, and it didn't save him. The win didn't save him. This is the part nobody warns you about in seminary. Spiritual victory and personal collapse can occupy the same week. The adrenaline that carried you through the conference, the revival, the building campaign, the funeral, the wedding, the counseling marathon, it has a bill. The body keeps the receipt. When Jezebel's threat came in chapter 19, verse 2, Elijah's tank was already empty. The threat just exposed what the victory had hidden. You felt this. The Monday after the big service, the week after the youth retreat, the month after you finally got the new building approved. Everyone else is celebrating, and you can't find the bottom of the tiredness. You start wondering if you ever really loved this calling, or if you just got good at performing it. That question is the broom tree. You're already sitting under it. Now watch what God does next. In 1 Kings chapter 19 verses 11 through 12, he brings Elijah to Horeb, the mountain of God. A great wind tears the rocks. God isn't in the wind. An earthquake shakes the ground. God isn't in the earthquake. Fire passes by. Fire. The very thing Elijah had famously called down on Carmel. God isn't in the fire. And then, a still small voice, a gentle whisper. Sit with that. The prophet's whole identity was built on dramatic spiritual fireworks. And God, knowing exactly what Elijah needed, refused to meet him in the form of his ministry brand. He came as a whisper, as if to say, the version of me you've been performing for the crowds is not the version that will save you tonight. You need the quieter one. Modern ministry has an addiction to the wind, the earthquake, and the fire. Bigger lights, bigger numbers, bigger platforms, conferences about going deeper that somehow always end up going wider. And meanwhile, the leader behind the curtain is starving for the whisper, for 1 hour where nobody needs anything from them, for God Himself, rather than God's assignment. Some will say burnout in ministry just means you weren't called, or your theology of grace was weak, or you tried to do God's work in your own strength. There's truth buried in that. Self-reliance is real, and it does grind people to dust. But Elijah's collapse should silence the easy version of that critique. He was called, he just demonstrated the power of God in front of a nation, and he still ended up under a tree begging to die. Calling does not make you exempt from limits. It just raises the stakes of ignoring them. Hear God's actual question to him, twice, in verses 9 and 13 of 1 Kings chapter 19. The Lord asks the same thing. What doest thou here, Elijah? Asked gently, asked twice. And Elijah answers both times with the same speech. I've been very jealous for you, the people have forsaken your covenant, and I, even I only, am left. That last line is the lie ministry whispers in every leader's ear. I'm the only one. The work depends on me. If I rest, it falls apart. If I leave, nobody else will pick it up. God's response in verse 18 is almost tender in its bluntness. Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal. 7,000. You were just the loudest one. The kingdom is bigger than your visibility. If that sentence landed somewhere uncomfortable, stay there. The smiling Sunday face hides a particular kind of pride. The pride of believing you're carrying something only you can carry. Real surrender starts when you can name the 7,000, the faithful elder in the back row, the intercessor nobody platforms, the retired missionary praying for your church by name every morning. You're tired partly because you've forgotten they exist. Paul names this exact tension in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 7 through 9. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God, and not of us. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Read it slowly. He says ministers do get troubled. He also says the trouble doesn't get the last word. The vessel cracks, the treasure survives. The cracks are how the treasure gets seen. So what does the way back look like? Not a sabbatical brochure, not a self-care hashtag. Look at how God actually restored Elijah, because the pattern is the prescription. Food, sleep, a long walk to a holy place, honest words spoken out loud, a whisper that reframed everything. A new assignment, but a smaller one. Anoint Hazael, anoint Jehu, anoint Elisha as your successor. Did you catch that last part? Part of healing was finding the man who would take the mantle. Elijah had to train the next prophet. If you are leading a church right now, hear this directly. The Elisha in your life is part of your recovery. The young leader you keep delaying mentoring because you're too busy. Bringing him up may be the very thing God uses to bring you back. Burnout often hides a refusal to share the weight. The juniper tree has room for one person, the kingdom doesn't. And then there's the verse you already know. Jesus, In Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me. For I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Notice, he says, take mine. The problem was always whose yoke you are wearing. Most ministry burnout comes from carrying a burden God never asked you to lift. The burden of being indispensable, of being impressive, of being the answer your people pray to instead of pointing them to the one they should be praying to. Lay that down. He never gave it to you. Here is the shift. Elijah's juniper tree was the middle of his ministry, not the end. After the bread, after the whisper, after the honest words, and the new apprentice, he went on to anoint kings and pour into the man who would receive a double portion of his spirit. The collapse became the doorway, only because he let God meet him in it instead of running further into the wilderness alone. If you're reading this from behind a smiling Sunday face, hear the voice that asked Elijah twice, "What are you doing here?" Asked as invitation. The God who fed his prophet under a tree and met him as a whisper is the same God watching you fake it through one more handshake line. He's asking you to come and eat. Step off the platform tonight. Tell one safe person the truth. Sleep until your body says it's enough. Read the gospel that saved you back when you weren't a brand. Find your Elisha and start handing him the keys to things you've been hoarding. And listen, really listen, for the whisper underneath all the noise you've built around your calling. The fire on Carmel made Elijah famous. The bread under the juniper tree made him whole. You don't need another mountaintop. You need the meal God already prepared in the shade you've been too proud to sit down in.